everyone. Welcome to another episode of Real Talk, Real Stories. My name is Advita Patel, and I am one of the co-founders for the Asian Comms Network. We show up every week with a story from one of our members or one of our advisory board members as well. And today, I am chuffed to bits to be joined by the fantastic Emb Hashmi. Hi, Em. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine. A little bit cold because the temperature has dropped and I think it's going to snow. But apart from that, really good to be here.
Brilliant. I know it's snowing in London, isn't it? Well, south.
It
It's
is,
really
yes,
snowing in Manchester for a change.
absolutely.
Honestly. If you're watching this on live, then please feel free to say hello. Where are you tuning in from? And if you're watching this on replay, then you can feel free to add your questions as well, and we'll make sure that Em gets them post live as well. So, for those folks who don't know who you are, do you want to tell everybody who you are and what you do right now?
So I'm Em, and I have been a journalist for 15 years, most of that with the BBC, and reported, produced, and presented. I am the founder of Storytelling for CEOs, which is basically helping businesses to tell stories basically and increase productivity internally and externally. It's the first in the world and it's AI integrated. But I'm also the board member of ACN, which I'm really proud to be, a voice for the community, I would say, especially for those working in media, marketing and PR. And it's a really, really great bunch of people, very senior people with lots of incredible insights that help and support everyone who's part of the organization, but wider as well.
Amazing. I mean, Fazana, Sharon, and I often pinch ourselves when we see the caliber around that board table that we've got. So, and we're really, really pleased to have your support with us. So, you've been a journalist for 15 years with the BBC specifically. What enticed you into this career? Like, have you always had this kind of desire to be a journo, or did something happen that kind of pushed you into that space? What was your kind of starting point?
That is a really good question and a question that I get asked an awful lot. And I have to say, I could not tell you as a little girl that when I grow up, I'm going to be a journalist. Because when I was a little girl, there was nobody who looked like me who was a journalist. So I couldn't relate. And it wasn't a career that anybody in my community ever spoke about. So it was a choice of doctor, lawyer, teacher, or maybe just get a nice, safe admin job. And it's funny because when I was little, I used to ask my dad lots of questions and he used to get really fed up. And it's a saying in our culture, but basically means, why do you always ask about the aunt's in-laws? Like you ask so many questions, you go really deep in, and he used to get fed up. So I guess I've always had it in me to be investigative and be interested in people's lives. Um, but yeah, I started off in a law degree, would you believe? And the first week I knew this wasn't for me. And thankfully, they were launching a new media program degree at the same university. So I'm like, okay, managed to get myself on that. And the rest, I guess, is history because then I ended up writing for the free paper. I ended up having my own community radio show. Even then, I couldn't tell you, yeah, I'm going to be a journalist. Then I started doing the food column because I love food. And kind of built from there, became an editor of a local newspaper. And then I got my first opportunity with the BBC at BBC Radio Derby, would you believe? And it was 2 days a week, and I was producing a whole Sunday evening program. And so that's kind of how it started. And then after my gig with Radio Derby, I kind of explored other parts of the BBC. And I think I've done like I've had experience of most parts of the BBC now. So from radio, television, online, Radio 4, BBC One, News 24, which is where I did most of my work, reporting on breaking news, live on air across the world to the whole world. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, but I could not have ever told you that I'm going to be a journalist when I grow up.
Oh my goodness, what a career. Like you had so much different parts of the kind of BBC experience, right? From what you described from radio to TV to broadcast. What has been, you said, you mentioned there that when you were younger, there wasn't anyone you could look up to in the world of journalism, that someone that looked like you, had similar lived experiences to you. You didn't see yourself in that space, and it never kind of came even in your career pathway that you could be a journalist. And even when you were in that space of journalism, even then you're a bit like, is it for me? Is it not for me? As you were kind of, what was one of your, suppose, barriers of this? So you're doing a law degree, you realized it wasn't for you. You then moved on to the new degree that was coming out. But did you foresee any barriers? Did you have any barriers, or was it fairly, were you fairly kind of like just moving around and not really noticing anything like that?
Barriers, that's a very interesting word. I feel that we have barriers more now than we ever have done. And when I was in that stage, I couldn't even tell you that it was a barrier. It's only because it just didn't exist, if you know what I mean. So when I was like watching television, I think the nearest person to me was someone like Lisa Aziz. And she wasn't even, exactly like me, but she was the nearest person. And even then I couldn't say, oh, I want to be like Lisa Aziz, because I thought that's not for me. And my parents did not understand what a journalist was back then, which was quite hilarious, because they were like, oh my God, those are people who go out to war and they get beaten up. You don't want to do that. No, that's not the word decent job. And I was like, okay. So it was quite interesting. And I guess the barrier was trying to get over that, convincing my parents. But I think as I moved along life and they saw me with published articles, they saw me do my own radio show, and then they saw me at the BBC, things completely shifted. And there was more people who looked like me, who were on air, who they can relate to. And I guess that was probably the main barrier, is to explain to people that actually journalism is for people like us. And I think when I started, especially with the BBC, I was probably 1% that represented the entire UK journalists sector of people who look like me. And now I think it's more 6 to 7%, which is getting better. Still a lot of room for improvement. But yeah, I think the biggest barrier is probably the explanation of why we should become journalists and getting over that. Even now, like when I explain to people I'm a journalist, I'm like, and then I tell them where I work and they're like, oh, wow. And funny thing, and I always laugh about this, whenever my dad used to introduce me now, he was like, oh, this is my daughter. And she worked for the BBC. And I'm like, Dad, what about my name? Hi, my name comes next. So the tables kind of shifted when they realized that actually it is a good career and it is an important career, especially for people who look like us, because there's the stories that I've told, nobody else could have told. And the access that I gained, nobody else could gain that access. So it's very important.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So when you did tell, as you said, there's this kind of pressure, right, on the South Asian people, and especially women, South Asian women, right, in essence as well, in terms of the degree we should be undertaking and how we should be showing up for ourselves in the way that, composed and quiet, and don't rock the boat and keep your head, don't lift your head too high up, and don't be too smart, don't be too clever. Keep it kind of level-headed, right? Nobody likes a show off. Those are the kind of things. No, I mean, I was really lucky, I suppose, and probably similar to you, where my family were very supportive of, me going out and doing all sorts of different things. But the community around me, less so. They never really advocated for young women to do things like communications or public relations or journalism. It was very much about, if you're going to go and do some work, go and do law. Maybe get in and doctor or medicine or whatever. So when you told your parents that I am no longer studying law and I'm moving to this degree, what was the initial reaction? Like, how did they kind of cope with that? Because you were going from a career they understood well, I would say, into something that were probably less understood. And especially, in those days, 15, 20 years ago, where it just wasn't a career that, like you said, that we ever entered.
It was interesting because I didn't understand. What it was. And I guess there may have been some disappointment because, when they go and tell their friends, what does your daughter do? She does law, but everybody understands law. Oh, that's a very prestigious title. Sounds nice. What does your daughter do? Oh, she's doing media. What's media? Huh? And there's a lot of explaining to do. So I guess it was a bit of a challenge. But I think it was about time as well, because I think they needed time to realize what it really was. So when I started writing, presenting, and then getting on the BBC, that's when for them it was really, oh, okay, now we get it. And now everybody gets it because we're everywhere. So yeah, I think there was like I think there's a lack of education about what journalists do. And I think that's really important. But saying that, Advita, even now, I think there's a lack of education about what journalists do. Because when I mentioned certain names of, who I worked for or worked with, and they were like, and they would automatically think I'm the complaints department, or that I represented a report or a TV piece or something that's already gone out, but I had nothing to do with it. So I think people are still confused, but a different type of confusion, because media organizations are massive and there's thousands of people sometimes working. So I don't know who's doing what half the time because they don't work next to me. So I think there's still a lot of explanation, but it's a different type of explanation. I think people get now what journalist is, what we do, because there's more of us who look like me. And I'm really glad about that, because I've had so many young women, especially, contacting me, and young men, but mostly women, who say, "Oh, we really admire you. We follow your work. We love the way you tell stories. How do I get in?" And I always help them. Like, I think one of the things we can do is, we don't have time, but we can reply to a DM or an email, give them links, try and introduce them to somebody. So I think that's really great. And I think, the more of us that enter this field, the better that we can start making change and telling the stories that are important to us.
Love that. So moving into because I know there'll be people watching this who work in public relations, right? For example, who have to have a relationship with journalists, to make sure that their service or product or the client they're representing is seen or recognized. And you've worked in this space for a long time, and as you have said, stories are really important, and that's you're the CEO of your new organization, where you're helping see other CEOs tell their story. What practical tips do you have for somebody who has to entice and get the attention of a journalist in terms of the story that they want you to share on their behalf? Like, what are those kind of moments for you that gets as a journalist to go, that's a really interesting story, and they've done a really good press release on that? What are those key tactics or advice you can give to individuals who may want to get the attention of someone like you to share their story for them?
A very, very good question, and I've been asked this many a time as well. I actually took part a few weeks ago in a thing called Meet the Press in Birmingham, where I was part of panelists, and there was ITV and Channel 4. And these are the kind of questions that we were getting because people didn't know how to contact us. But what I would say is a couple of things. A, if you're contacting a busy journalist in a busy newsroom, you have to make sure that your story is aligned to that news agenda of the day. And you have to basically realize, okay, I want to contact a person who's working for News 24, or a person who's working for Sky News, Rolling News, or Al Jazeera, and I want to comment on the story that they're covering today. So when you think about that, you look at, first of all, what I would do is, if you can't find the name of the journalist or the email, go onto the site, the website of the organization. They always now have a contact us, have your say, or you contact them on social media, or you look up the journalist or the presenter and you see who works with them. A lot of times people say producer of, and then you try and contact them that way. But one of the things that is really important, and I don't think a lot of people know, is you can't send the same email or the same press release to every single journalist. You can't be generic, because one journalist is working in a really fast paced breaking news environment. The other journalist is working on a long form radio program, which they're planning for. Another journalist might be working on a program for tomorrow. Everyone needs a different type of approach, because when I'm really busy in the newsroom, which is what I used to do, and there's breaking news left, right, and center, I will not have time to open your email, read a very long and sometimes quite complicated press release, and think about how this is going to fit what I'm doing next. Next could be the next 10 minutes. We've got Trump on, we've got the Ukraine war, we've got Palestine. How is this going to fit? So you need to make that job easy for someone like me or someone in the newsroom. So you need to put in the heading. You need to be watching the news, obviously, and you need to put in the heading Palestine guest, or I don't know, Israeli minister available for speaking, whatever you're offering. So I'm like, oh, straight away I see it, because we get thousands of emails. Open it, and then your press release, if you put a press release on, it should be a really interesting, sharp and short heading. It needs to be why we need to speak to you right now. When are they available and what time zone and what do they say, bullet points and what do they say? So we could digest that quickly. And I would take out all the jargon, because if we start Googling what certain words mean, you've lost
Yeah.
us, because you just don't have time to do that. And
Yeah.
as a producer on a rolling news network, for example, one of the things we do is we do briefs. So if you're doing the brief for us and saying they're going to say this, you're cutting out half our work, although we still have to verify that.
Okay.
And I think you make things easier, and make things easier by telling us when you're available, what's the best number to contact you on, what is the time zone, that kind of stuff. So that would be really, I mean, I think if you do that, you got more of a chance of getting on like a breaking news. But if for example, you want to contact, like, I don't know, World Service for a program they're going to be starting recording next week or next month, it's different. They need more details. So you look at what kind of programs they do, and then you basically align whatever you're trying to pitch to that program or to that. So I know you've done a story about climate change, and I wonder if you're interested in this because of this reason and that reason, and you covered this, but you haven't covered this aspect. So give them a reason to want to contact you, and make them think that, okay, yeah, you're right. We did all of this aspect of climate change, but that we haven't heard. And then you can also say this is why it's going to be interested to your viewers, and make sure you kind of done a bit of a research on who are their viewers. Are they like 16 to 24-year-olds, or are they like 40 to 65-year-olds? It's quite easy to get that information, who listens, and then you can tailor your approach. So you can say we have a social media reel, we have lots of images that you can put online, and then also you can make your content or whatever you're sending them press release a lot more in depth, because they have more time to process. So this is our background, this is why we're doing what we're doing, these are the guests we have on offer, this is a little bit of bio of the guests, so they have more time to read, and then these are the contact numbers, and this is how you contact us. So you have to always think about, who am I emailing,
Yeah.
where do they work, and how fast paced is it, and then align whatever you're sending them to that. But also always, if you want to get on the news, for example, check the news agenda.
Yeah. Love that. Such practical, real advice, especially when we're living in such a quick, moving environment, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned, and we'll talk about your new storytelling for CEOs business as well, but you mentioned that that's incorporated with AI. And I'm assuming with AI now, and generative AI specifically, journalists are probably being bombarded with mediocre types of releases that don't align with what you have just shared in terms of practicalities, right? Which I can imagine, because I've got a few journalist friends who were frustrated because they're like, you're to your point, you're like making me do the work now, and that's really annoying me, and I haven't got the time to look at the jargon, look at who your person is that you're wanting me to have on the news or put on this program. So I suppose the top advice here is do your due diligence. Spend a bit of time and energy getting to know that sector, those journalists in that sector, and what type of news stories they are interested in, that get that thing. I love that.
100%.
If anybody
100%.
has got any questions for around this, please do pop them in the comments wherever you're watching us from right now. So going on to your storytelling for CEOs, what inspired you then to start this part of your business? Like, you've been a journalist for 15 years. You're obviously a great storyteller. You've worked in various different markets and different parts of the BBC and others. What was your kind of nudge to do this piece of work and start this business?
There's a few different reasons. One of the things is that I realized that a lot of people were asking me for advice, especially when they were in the business world, and they were sharing press releases and saying, what do you think of this? And which program do you think this would be aligned to? And a lot of times I was reading them thinking, oh my God, I have no idea what this says. And sometimes I was squinting and thinking, I can't even read this. It's so small, and practical things. And then I thought there must be something for businesses where they can go and learn how to tell their story, because sometimes when we had people, when I was booking CEOs, because I also worked some time on the BBC Business World Report, where we book CEOs and head of companies, and a lot of times they wanted to know, well, what questions are you going to ask us? And then sometimes these big CEOs would give them to a marketing or a PR person, and they would answer and say this and say it like this. And although that's good and practical, and you get your message out there, what really works is you personally speaking from and not basically reading off a script. And so I guess I felt like there was a need there, and there was a need for people to connect, because now more than ever, people do not buy your product or service; they buy you.
Yeah.
And then they look at what's the product and what's the service. They look at what's the story behind the brand, and every brand now has a story.
Yeah.
And you can see how things have now changed and evolved. You just don't go and buy something generic off the shelf. We've already kind of got in our head we want to buy this brand because we've seen it here and here, and I love the story behind this brand. And that's really important. I think a lot of businesses are now adapting to that, but a lot of them don't know how to adapt. So,
Yeah.
for example, I was reading statistics like if you went into a large company, 70% of the staff, they would really struggle to tell you what the company strategy is, because it wasn't effectively told from top to top down.
Mhm.
Not the fault of the CEO or the management, it's just the way that that's structured. And the same with like founders and startups. I found that, you've seen the statistic, 90% of them fail in the first 2 years. And a lot of that has to do with the effective communication and the fact that they're not getting their story across, not because their product or service is bad. And so I realized that there wasn't anything out there. So then I basically spent a year doing lots of research development, speaking to lots of incredible experts, and I built this 8 module, and I call it a, a brand new version of what an MBA should be. So it's a mini digital MBA. But what I've done is I've thought about the person who, or the people that I'm serving, and thought about the fact that actually they don't have time. We're busy people, especially if you're running a business.
Yeah.
So that each module you can do in 1 hour, and you could do it online. It's all online. And if you wanted to, you can do the entire mini MBA in a whole day. Or if you're busy, you can pace it and take a whole year. And I've thought about, the fact that how we work, and then you have access to it. And what I've done is I've taken two great things, traditional MBA, and kind of revitalized it, and really popular visual masterclasses from really well-known people. And I've married the two. So you get your masterclass, but you could do it, and you can listen to like really, really popular people that you've seen on TV or heard of or read about. And then with the traditional MBA, which you do in 1 hour, and each MBA has prompts. So you can use those prompts in real life. So for example, if you're going on stage and you need a 5-minute speech and you have no idea what to say, take a prompt, say, my name is, I'm going to speak at X, and this is my audience, and this is my message. And it will tell you exactly how to say it and how to be impactful. A lot of people don't know how to do that,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And one of the things that I really am proud of is the fact that within this program, there's two methods that you will learn. One is called the flip method, where you flip your story. You have to feel the emotion of a story to really make the impact and hook people.
Yeah.
And I used it on my TED talk, actually, the flip method, and how I flipped my story, which I did a few weeks ago. And then the other one is the 30-second story, which we branded. And that's really it's fun. It's a fun way of learning, but it's really important, because when you speak to someone, it doesn't matter who it is, especially if it's a new person, and it's almost like the elevator pitch. You need to grip them in the first 30 seconds, otherwise you've lost them. They're not interested. And so you
Yeah.
need to make sure that you've got the emotion, who you are, what you do, and why you do it, and the call to action, and all of that in 30 seconds without sounding like you're just going to run a marathon and nobody understands. So we kind of teach you how to do that. And we do that with this really fun, we do workshops as well. And we take our sand timer, and we teach people, and we're like, right, you got 30 seconds. And I've done it a few times. I delivered a session at NatWest, actually. And it was really interesting that a lot of people struggled, and they were thinking, and they did not realize that. And I tell you something, I was actually talking to one person who's part of the panel, sorry, the audience,
Mhm.
and I did not understand what he was saying. He was using such technical words of what he did, and literally it took 5 or 6 attempts with me helping him to realize what he actually did, rather
Yeah.
than using really. And I was like, okay, so you sell certificates for bricklayers to then move up. And I was like, he's like, yeah. And I'm like, why didn't you say that right at the beginning? Because he's using, and I didn't know. And I'm like, this is what it is. People do not know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You should just take away all the jargon and everything, and just go bring it down to as simple as possible. And that's what we were taught as journalists as well, by the way, because we don't know who our audience is. So make sure everybody understands what you're saying.
Yeah. Love that. Brilliant. You just mentioned there you did a TED talk a few weeks ago. What was the so we're going to share the link in the comments as well so people can watch it. But what was your kind of big, I suppose it's, it's one of those aspirations, isn't it? Lots of folks that I speak with who are speakers generally have TED Talk on their vision board or have the ambition to do it. What inspired you to kind of put yourself forward for something like a TED Talk? Like, how did you get involved in that?
It's funny you should say that, because at the start of this year in January, I did put it on my vision board. Never thinking how it would manifest itself. Completely forgot about it and just carried on with life. And in fact, because I work with Aston University to support my program, which is also CPD accredited, they actually started researching me and Googling me and said, "Oh, you sound like a really fun person and you're really interesting. Would you be interested in doing a TED Talk?" And I'm like, yes. And I kind of had a little giggle and I'm like, well, this is on my vision, but I would never be able to tell you in January that I will be doing a TED Talk through Aston University. It was just crazy. So yeah, I jumped at the chance because it's something I wanted to do. But let me tell you something. I mean, you might be a speaker, you might have spoken in front of thousands of people. Myself, I've audiences of millions, no issue at all. And then you do a TED Talk and everything changes, because they have a certain format. You have to say things, you can't promote what you do. And also you have to talk about your own experience and link that. And you don't get a script and you don't get prompts or anything. You just have to do this from raw. And I stupidly decided to tell my own story and use my own methods to tell and say, this is how I did it. And I was thinking, oh my God, did I say that bit right? Did I say that bit right? Was that bit supposed to come before this bit? And so it's a lot harder than you think. But I'm so grateful that I did it, and I'm now happy to do it again now that I know how to do it. But it was good because I wasn't sure if I used the right subject, but after the TED Talk, these young girls came up to me and they were like, "Oh, I'm so glad you opened up, because that's us, and how do we do this?" And that's the whole point of sharing your story. I always say you could even end up saving someone's life just by sharing your story. You do not understand. And some people think the story isn't important and why should they share it? Nobody cares. They do care. You'll be very surprised the impact you have.
Yeah, no, I'm like, this is the reason we wanted to do these LinkedIn lives, because the stories that our community have are so powerful. And even if one person takes something away from that individual, that's empowering, right? And you're 100% spot on. Like, storytelling is something that has been embedded in all of us, regardless of our background, lived experience, ethnicity, gender. It's something that connects humans to humans, and there is something in that. And I think we need to appreciate and recognize that everybody's got a good story to tell. And I think that's really important. Talking about your year, you've had an exceptional year, from the awards that you've been winning. We've been seeing this one after another, right? You had the Asian Achievers Awards. We were at an award ceremony a couple of weeks ago together. How, like you said, in January, you never really expected, to be speaking on TED Talk or, potentially getting these awards and stuff. What advice do you have for people? We're heading into the new year. There'll be people who may not feel that they've achieved as much as they would want to achieve, or, haven't got their voice out in the way they wanted to. What's your kind of number one piece of advice for people who are watching or listening to us who may feel a bit like, meh, like things are a little bit hard? How would you encourage them to kind of get out of that, the period of like low period that people are facing? Because it has been a tough year, with everything that we've been hearing, listening, the kind of rhetoric around inclusion and groups like ours shouldn't really exist. What advice do you have to people who are maybe feeling a bit heavy right now as we lead up to 2026?
I think if you listen to my TED Talk, you will see that I would say this to people. I would say, I think I've been through every barrier any human could go through. And life was very rarely ever wonderful and hunky-dory. It's been really difficult. But one thing that I did do is I carried on. You have to push on and you have to continue, because one of the most important things is, things might not be so great right now, but your next chapter is being written. So you do not know what is in your next chapter. And the other thing I would say is reach out, share your story, because even if you think your story isn't great, there might be somebody who hears it, whether it's your friend or your colleague or your parent or somebody on social media who might reach out and help you make that change. And that could be a really definitive time for you. But from somebody who has had a lot of bad times, and I have had a lot of bad times, and it looks like I'm having a hunky-dory life. I'm not. It's very difficult, but social media, it looks amazing, but yeah, there's loads of trials and tribulations. I would say stay positive. I think the moment you start being negative about everything, negative things happen. And people have been saying that for a long time, and I only got it this year. And what I would say is use your negative as a positive. That's how you flip. So basically say, okay, something didn't work out, but actually there was a reason for that didn't work out, because it's better doors for you. And just reach out, share your story, or reach out to someone and tell your story in private. You never know what change that could make. But I would always say you have to continue. Whatever your barrier is, carry on, because there will be good days to come.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so important, to end on this note, going right back to the Asian Comms Network. One of the reasons we did set up the network was for people to connect, to build those stories, as you've spoken about, to share the trials and the tribulations and the adversity that we may be facing in everyday moments that other people may not understand if they don't work in the industries that we work in. So if you are interested in being part of the Asian Comms Network, connecting with people like and the others that we've had on here as well, then please do come and find out more about what we can offer you. It's if you go to our website, asiancommsnetwork.com, all the details are on there. And we're here to help, and nobody needs to do this on their own or in isolation. There's a whole host of communities, from members to board advisors, who are there to support, here to advise, here to guide you. So please don't feel like you are on your own. And as Em said, every story counts, and it's really important that yours is heard as well. Well, thank you so much, Em, for your vulnerability, your honesty, sharing some incredible top tips and practical advice for the folks who are listening in. We really appreciate you. What's the best way for people to contact you if they want to find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
2 ways. You can just DM me. I'm very responsive, because I understand how hard it can be to move forward. So I'm like one of those people, if I will always respond to your DM, if I can help or not. And the other thing is, if you want to know more about storytelling, we have a contact page, which is on our website, which is storytellingforceos.com.
Storytellingforceos.com. Amazing. Thank you so much, Em, and thank you for those of you who've been watching us live, or if you're watching us on replay. Feel free to pop your question in the comment areas of wherever you're watching, and we'll make sure they get to Em as well, and we'll respond back to you. But take care of yourselves, and I will be back again next week with another fantastic guest. See you all soon. Thanks, Em.
Thanks. Bye.